Greetings, dear listeners. This is Jonah Goldberg, host of the Remnant podcast, brought to you by the Dispatch and Dispatch Media. Not that you can tell, because you'll be hearing this at a normal time, but this is a special edition of the Remnant for a couple reasons. First, because I'm recording it on a Saturday. And second, because, what do they say on advisory opinions? They call Sarah's husband of the pod. What we consider, even though David French is technically dead to us for leaving, we still consider sort of his wife, Nancy French, wife of the Dispatch in a certain way. So she's a beloved friend, and she's got an amazing book out called Ghosted, an American Story, and she's here on The Remnant. Welcome, Nancy.
Thank you so much for having me. This is fun.
Yeah, no, this is very exciting, and I will, just full disclosure, I texted Sarah about an hour ago, and I said, I have Nancy coming on the podcast. Do you have any questions that would really embarrass David that you want me to ask Nancy? And she said she loved the idea, but she only gave me like boxers or briefs, and frankly, I don't want to know the answer, and so we'll just leave that there. All right. Rules of this podcast are, when we have authors on, the first question I always ask is the question you always want to be asked, which is, what's your book about?
Right. No, thank you for asking. So my book is called Ghosted, and that sort of has a double meaning, because I've been a ghostwriter for many years. But recently I decided to tell my own story. I'm approaching 50. So I thought it was time for me to quit hiding behind other people's stories. And so I decided to tell my own story. But the theme of my story is being rejected by various groups of people who were supposed to support me. And so, in society, people say that you're ghosted when people sort of reject you in sort of a certain way. So that's how I've felt for the past few years, for reasons that maybe many of your listeners will understand. But it's a story for all of you who might feel spiritually, culturally, or politically homeless.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason I picked the name The Remnant for this podcast. So
yes, David's upset about that. He wants that name so bad.
He whines so much about it. Yeah, so it is very weird. My mom was a ghostwriter. I married a ghostwriter, and David, who's like a longtime friend and colleague, married a ghostwriter, and like they're probably only, I don't know, 50. 75 successful ghostwriters alive. I mean, I'm not to guess, right? But it's if I had the same exposure to nuclear physicists, everyone would say, well, that's weird, But let me ask you, so like I always say, I could never do the kind of writing that my wife does, because I need to be, I can't write for long except in my own voice.
Right.
For you, like, do you find it more fun, more a weird transition? We'll get to the crazy life story stuff. Don't worry. But we talked about ghosting, and I just wanted to ask, like, does writing in your own voice about yourself feel wildly different?
Oh, it was so hard. But, I always wrote for myself, like essays and articles and stuff while I was ghostwriting. But I love both of them. I love ghostwriting because it takes the edge off, the pressure off, because it's not my story. Like when I'm sitting with my client, I just record everything they say. I clean up their grammar. I just make sure that the storytelling principles are in effect. But I love telling other people's stories because I feel like it's such a sacred honor to sort of enter into what they've been through. Now, on my own book, when I started writing it, I thought that it would be super easy because I've written so many books. I don't know how many, like 20 or 30. Mm-hmm. But in one of them I wrote in 24 days. So I can
nuts.
Yeah, it's nuts. My spiritual gift is speed. But when I wrote my own, I was just completely arrested by my inability to put everything down into words, because I kept laboring over, is this too much? Is this too harsh? Is this too sad? Is this too frivolous? Is this too funny? I was just I didn't know how to be myself. But I think I've pulled it off. I don't know.
No, look, it's great. I will just confess, I haven't finished it. Okay. You sent very fancy gift box thing when you sent us this copy. It was so schmancy. And I get a lot of books that come to the house, and it was like, I thought it was going to be full of potpourri or something. And
we should have done that.
And of course my wife stole it, and then I was crazy busy this week, so I picked it up. last night, and I started to tear through it. I listened to the Russell Moore podcast, where I don't think I've ever heard Russell Moore more effusive about anything
Right.
other than Jesus, his Lord and Savior, than this book. It was really, and it really does, and the reviews are amazing, and it moves. It's weird how some books just move really quickly. Your eye just sort of flies across the page. So tell me about this mountain. Or tell people, the masses, about this place where your people come from, and what it was like.
Yeah, so my family's from Montego Mountain in Tennessee, which is in the hills of the Appalachia Mountains. And my grandfather was a coal miner. My dad worked in the coal mines, and they had 7 kids and lived, like all 5 of the boys, slept in the same room. I think it was a 3-room house. So, heated with one of those, stoves, wood burning stoves, and always so cozy and full of like pipe smoke. And I love my family so much. We were maybe a little more violent than most families would be. Had maybe a few more secrets, but I love my family, and they were really wonderful to me. They were just full of very interesting characters that sort of shaped my life, including but not limited to my aunt, who was a psychic, and read crystal balls. And, I would sit in her lap and watch her do her thing. But yeah, just very different from the way that I eventually ended up growing up, because my dad got off the mountain. He, at 15, changed his name and birthday and joined the Marines and served for 3 years and still hadn't graduated from high school. He never did. He got his GED. But the thing that my dad did, for which I'll be forever grateful, is he moved off the mountain and raised us in a different place. Not that Montego Mountain is a terrible place to live, but our circumstances changed pretty dramatically when he moved us off the mountain, and we could sort of grow up in a different, less hillbilly type of place. Jonah, do you remember this? When I got my book deal, we were hanging out like pretty soon afterwards, and you said to me, "What is the difference between a hillbilly and a redneck? You need to articulate that, because people aren't going to understand." And so I remember after I wrote the book, I went in and I was like, "Jonah told me to put this in there," so I inserted a little paragraph for you.
I appreciate that. And what's your answer?
Well, the way that I thought about it in the book, in our context, is that rednecks are sort of flamboyantly ignorant. So they advertise it on their bumpers and on their tattoos, but hillbillies just don't care what we think. So they might share some of the same characteristics, but they're not as concerned about their branding.
No, that makes some sense, because I was thinking about this. The mountain, you're talking about. This is a coherent community, right? It's people actually living on it, living with each other. And rednecks are more like people who live amongst non-rednecks, right?
Right.
They're in the exurbs or the rural parts on the outskirts of cities, but they have more interactions because they're living amongst other classes of kind of people. While the hillbillies are like sort of like Shangri-La or Brigadoon, but with more whiskey and shotguns, and
Lots more.
And it's so it makes sense in some ways that they don't care, because it's sort of it's a more hermetically sealed or hermit-like kind of community kind of thing.
Yes, and I was reading a book about the mountain because I was trying to understand it as I was writing this. And one of the more historical books was talking about how people had to find husbands and wives and friends, but mainly husbands and wives within walking distance, which, makes a lot of problems, because a lot of times you're related to them, or, whatever. But he was making the point that if you looked at this was written in the 1980s. If you looked at the phone book in the 1980s versus like 1940s, it's all the same last names. So anyway, yeah, it's pretty insular.
Yeah, and I mean, just so listeners know, when you talk about it being a little more violent, you mean that literally, not figuratively. I mean, like, you had a cousin who shot off a cousin's arm or whatever. I can't remember what it was, but it was violent. I mean, like, not metaphorical violence, like violence.
Right. Death, lots of shootings. Frequently, like my grandparents would get in arguments and they would be drunk and just start shooting each other, shooting the ceiling, shooting the walls. Every time my dad heard a siren, he figured one of his parents had killed the other. Just lots of domestic violence. My grandfather broke my grandmother's leg right before the wedding of my parents, so she couldn't even be in photographs. Just lots of drama and trauma.
Um, and so it is obvious to everyone listening to this that with that kind of childhood, of course, you would end up marrying David French. I mean, it's sort of like the most predictable thing imaginable. But so, like, why don't you tell people how you were at Lipscomb University? How you met David and how that went? Because
Yeah,
this is basically a love story.
It really is, and it's so great. Yes, because David is like his family is they're members of the Mayflower Society. I don't think David is, but his family is about as white as you can be. And from the mountain, we had a bunch of just a mixture of things, Cherokee Indian, just a bunch of stuff. And so I grew up in Western Tennessee, away from the mountain. The mountains are in East Tennessee, and my parents were wonderful. They were fundamentalist. They are fundamentalist Christians, wonderful people. But they took us to church 3 times a week. And one of the things that they wanted me to do was to go to a certain Christian college in Nashville called David Lipscomb, which I did not want to do because I wanted to see the world and experience everything. But so they forced me to go to Lipscomb. That was the only place that they would pay for the tuition. So I just decided to be, this may come to as a shock, a jerk to everyone who called me from the from the college. So they would call and they'd be like, "Are you so excited to go to Lipscomb? We can't wait to see you in the fall." And I would say no, because I want to get into a good medical school, and I can't get into a good medical school from Lipscomb. And I was just blowing smoke. I made up a bunch of stuff: medical school, veterinary school. I don't want to do any of these things. And then finally I said law school, and I said law school to someone who called my bluff. And he said, "Law school, that's interesting. My friend David just graduated from here and he's at Harvard Law School. Is that good enough for you?" And I didn't even know how to spell Harvard. I had no interest in law school, and I did not know any lawyers because we were growing up in rural Tennessee. So, well, I think my neighbor went to the Nashville School of Law. So, I did know him. But anyway, I went to the public library. I researched Harvard and law school because this guy said, "I'll have David call you in a week." So I had to get smart, or at least so I could pass as smart. So I went to I went to the library. I learned everything I could about Harvard. And then he called me a week later and we had this wonderful conversation, but he let it be known that he was engaged to someone else. And my heart sort of fell because I thought he was amazing. Now, he was 6 years older than me, so this did not make any sense that I would be even remotely disappointed. And he was not flirting with me at all, unfortunately. But several years later, I did go to that school. Hated it with a hot burning passion. And so after he graduated from Harvard, he was walking down the sidewalk and I saw him and I knew what he looked like because they had a picture of him in the student government office. And I saw him and I was like, "Hi, I'm Nancy. You talked me into going to this place and I hate it as much as I told you I would. And nice to meet you." And for some reason he wasn't like put off by my weird aggression. And we ended up like he asked me out that day. On a second date, I decided I would marry him. And within 3 months we were married. So it was like one of these crazy stories. I married someone that I barely knew, and my mother called him the rank stranger. Still does.
Reminds me, Declan, our executive editor, at his wedding, he told this amazing story about his grandparents. And on his grandparents' second date, his grandpa took his would eventually be his grandmother on their second date. He took him to a housewares store, and he said, "Because we both know where this is going." Which I just think is just the cutest story. So first of all, did David have hair at the time?
He was not overburdened with hair at the time.
Okay,
yeah.
So it has to be true love because it's not like he had Samson like locks that swept you off your feet.
He was not Fabio, but you know what, Jonah? Now I'm bald as an eagle, so I can appreciate people who can overlook the aesthetic.
We'll talk about that in a little bit for listeners who may be taken aback by that. And so your parents called him the stranger. What did David's parents think of the hillbilly coming down, yeehawing, taking away their son?
They were always very supportive. It was interesting. David had gone, he was engaged to a different person. And that was a very traumatic ending of that relationship, for which I'm very thankful. And I had nothing to do with the demise of that relationship. But they were very thankful. Like from the first moment they saw me, they just knew that it was destiny. And this is his parents were, they're the type of people who, when they pray, they believe that God is just going to answer them immediately with very dramatic results. And I always am like, oh, there's no way that they can communicate with God the way that they say that they do. But it is true. These people have some sort of connection to God, because before I met them, David's mother was praying for David after the terrible breakup. And she had this vision of a person that he would marry that had hair that was like mine. It was short, dark hair. It was straight. So when I met her for the first time, she was like, oh, it's like she recognized me from that vision. I have never told anybody that. Now I'm saying it on this podcast, but that's weird, isn't it?
It's a little weird.
It's very weird,
yeah.
But I don't know what made them appreciate me, but it was probably that vision, and I'm thankful for that vision. And in-laws who talk to God so dramatically and accurately, I guess.
It's very cinematic, It's
yes,
like you
right?
walk in and like they could have foreshadowed and all that kind of stuff. It's great.
Yeah.
And so, like, did you have any idea what you wanted to be when you grew up at this point?
I wanted to be important. And so that's why I would say things to these admissions people. I would pick the most dramatic thing that I knew, but I was from West Tennessee, so I didn't actually know like what was prestigious. So I would say, okay, doctor, lawyer, veterinarian, because they have, whatever. So I just wanted to do something that was important, but then I couldn't execute on anything that was important. Like I think I've got some sort of learning disability. I dropped out of college like 3 times. I wasn't that great at school, Jonah. So I ended up just sort of teaching myself, but I didn't do it like, oh, now I want to be an author. The only thing that I wanted to do is I love storytelling. And I think that's so fun, but like, how do you monetize that? Like nobody can monetize that. So I just figured that I would, just have a 9 to 5 and, do something and just have a normal life. But I couldn't even accomplish that because I couldn't even graduate.
So how did you end up becoming a speechwriter? Because it's not a speechwriter, a ghostwriter. It's one of these professions that very few people like plan on doing.
Right. And I wrote a couple of books under my own name. And I think Winston Churchill has this great quote where he says, I'm the writer of rare books. I just never intended them to be rare. And so I wrote a couple of books that no one bought. And then actually, Anne Romney bought one of my books, and she really identified with it, which is shocking. And it also talks about about what happens when you write books is people identify with you. So like Sarah Palin and Anne Romney both identified with me and thought that we could be sisters by reading one of my previous books. And I can scarcely imagine different people than Anne Romney and Sarah Palin.
Yeah.
But that's the power of story, is that people get, into it and they can identify with it. So when Anne read that book, she asked me to help her write her book in 2008, back when Mitt Romney was going to possibly be the GOP nominee, but he wasn't. So we worked together on that, went through, South Carolina on their tour bus. And, but ultimately that was never published. But that led into other opportunities. And a few months later, HarperCollins called and asked me to do Bristol Palin's book. And I was super disappointed in, the way that the Mitt Romney did not get the GOP nomination. And so McCain had. And so I hadn't really paid that much attention to what was going on with the Palins. But of course I said yes, and ended up in Alaska, living there for a month and hanging out with Bristol and getting to know her story. And that was a New York Times bestseller. And so that just opened the floodgates of conservative books that came to me.
So how'd you get into writing books under your own name first? Like what someone who says I might want to be a veterinarian, a doctor, a lawyer ends up writing books is not necessarily, it doesn't.
Right. Yeah. I just started writing. I wanted to write, and I'd read a bunch of books on how to write. And then David was he was an instructor at Cornell Law School, a writing instructor. So he taught me how to write. And I know this is this is not what you're supposed to say if you're some sort of, like if I wanted to impress everyone about my own prowess, but David French taught me how to write. Now I can write better than he can, and that's not no one's fault. But yeah, he taught me how to write, and I just would do things though, Jonah, like I would answer Craigslist ads, and they would promise $25 if you wrote this thing, and I would do it. I would write it really well, and I would submit it, and they wouldn't pay me. I know this is not shocking to anyone, but it only took me 3 or 4 times to stop doing that. But eventually, I sort of got I got an opinion column in the Philadelphia City paper, which was free. But I got paid $100 for that. So that's sort of how I started my career, was through Craigslist and the Philadelphia City paper.
Yeah, when I first started at National Review Online, I got paid $25 per blog post for my thing, and so some days I cleared a good 125.
Wow.
But so there are a couple of elephants in the room that we're 20 minutes in and we haven't really gotten to. I mean, except for the shooting and stuff.
Right.
Haven't gotten to much of the drama. So part of the reason why the book is called Ghosted is because you're a ghostwriter, but part of it is because like the people who you think are your tribe keep ghosting you,
Right.
or maybe they think you're ghosting them. So it's a triple entendre.
Right.
When was the first time you felt like the people who you thought were your people maybe really weren't? Like, maybe this isn't my team after all.
I was standing in church. That's probably, you could start a lot of stories with this. I was standing in church, and Donald Trump, it was a Sunday, and Donald Trump had just mocked John McCain. Now, I was never a huge fan of John McCain. I hated McCain-Feingold. I hated a lot of the stuff, but he was an American hero. And for sure, you could criticize him for many things, but not for his military service,
Right.
at least not his being a prisoner of war. I mean, it's insane. So I was standing there, and Donald Trump had just made that comment about how I prefer my heroes not to be captured. And I was so incredulous. I couldn't believe it. So I was standing there with my phone. Yes, I was on my phone at church and during coffee hour. And I was like, y'all aren't going to believe this. And I read the quote to people that were standing around me. And these people were wonderful people. These were people who sent boxes to David when he was in Iraq. These people supported the troops. These people helped me during his deployment. And when I read what Trump said, they laughed.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think that's such a weird response, because in my life, like my dad is a former Marine, David was in the Army. You don't think as a Republican that there will be a moment where your standard bearer is mocking the best that America has to offer, and courage and valor and service, and the military generally. I for some reason I thought that the entire GOP in America would rise up in indignation and condemn this man to the outskirts of, cultural importance. But that's not what happened. People were like, yeah, I don't like John McCain. Yeah, that's awesome. Ha ha ha. I wouldn't say that, but I'm glad somebody's saying that. And I was just standing there thinking, oh, I've lost a beat on my party. And that was important, Jonah, because I wrote articles for prominent conservatives. And so it was important for me to know how conservatives think. So it was very jarring for me to have this moment later when I went to talk to my clients about the military comment that Trump had. They laughed. And these were people for whom I'm supposed to relay their thoughts to the world. So how could I relay that sort of thought? And so I pushed back on that. And I was eventually able to, ameliorate some of the more harsh things that people were trying to say. But eventually my clients sort of got sick of me and didn't want me to push back on, their rhetoric, which I understood, because they didn't hire me to like nag them to death. So yeah. I understood that.
Yeah. So it's a funny moment, because there's actually, I'm sure it's still up, a corner post over at National Review where I'm like, I told you so. Like, this is it. This is over for Trump, and and obviously I was wrong too. And Steve Hayes, I believe either it was his questioning or he had a follow-up questioning that prompted some of those remarks that ignited a lot of the controversy. So like that was a weird moment for a bunch of us, that we were all sort of like, it was this holy crap, what happened, why am I immune to this guy's charm moment for
Right.
a handful of us. And because it was probably, I don't know if it was the first moment for me, but it was definitely, if someone asked me the question I asked you, that's the question that's the answer I probably would come up with. And so let me put it this way. So this is one of the time-honored questions on this podcast. Do you think these people changed, or were they always like this and you just didn't know it?
I think both, but I think I'm erring on the side of the latter.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think I was the one that was naive, because I believed it. Like, my parents didn't tell me what to think politically. They sort of, I think it was during when Dukakis was running, like I started looking into the issues and I came down on the side of the Republican Party. But I believed what they were saying. Like, I believed the rhetoric. I believed that this was the party that was about Americans' strong military and fiscal responsibility and family values and God and all the things. And I just believed all that. But and the reason why I say this is, we did so much work in '08 trying to convince people to support Mitt Romney for president. And we dealt with the religion issue, and we talked to so many people who had, quote unquote, deeply held biblical beliefs so that they could not support a Mormon candidate. And I believed that. And I was like, oh, okay, great. I'm going to study the scriptures and pray, and I'm going to go talk to them and make theological arguments. And 5 minutes later, they're supporting this person who's been held liable for rape, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the deeply held biblical belief stuff was all a lie. So I believed the lie. I've been, betrayed by the church before, but this was the most, it was just shocking, the alacrity of people saying we have deeply held biblical beliefs and our person must be deeply Christian, to Donald Trump, it's not so bad. I like him. Yeah, he punches when, it's just, so I think they just were lying to me. Or to, to themselves.
Let's explore that, because I'm not sure I agree with you, but I don't want to be the one in the position of defending evangelical Christians against Nancy French, right? That's just a weird place for me to end up.
Right.
But I tend to think that, yeah, they were lying, but they were lying to themselves.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not like, this is a point my friend Yuval Levin makes, is that cynicism is actually very hard to maintain. Like, it can be like a gateway drug. All that it's a transactional thing, lesser two evils thing, is the way it flipped a lot of people, and then they couldn't sustain that, and so they switched to actually convincing themselves that Donald Trump was a good man and an honorable man and a genius and a four-dimensional chess player and all these kinds of things, where the same kind of people, if you talk to them, in June of 2015 or 2016, they would have said, yeah, look, I just can't vote for Hillary, so I got to go for this guy. He's a crude boob. And so my point is that I think when it was normal politics, people could convince themselves, whether you call it biblical values or character matters or true conservatism or whatever. And then what happened was, you have this guy who gets into people's brains from a different pathway because he was an entertainment figure. And once you have people's loyalty or fandom, right? You can manipulate them in all sorts of. That's what con artists do. Is they first make you a friend, and then they sell you the bogus condo, right? And so I think there were a lot of these people who were pretty sincere when they were saying these things. They just didn't realize how easily they could be suckered, and then once suckered, how easily they could lie to themselves about it, right? But that's, I
Right.
mean, I, people hate it when I have these conversations on this podcast, because if they think it's this accusation against them, right? Is, how dare you say I was suckered? And it's like, well, since I don't like Ramesh Ponnuru always used to say, of course, I think I have all of the right principles, because
Yeah.
if I didn't think they were the right principles, they wouldn't be my principles,
Right.
right?
Right.
It's like, so like either I think I'm right and you guys are wrong, or vice versa, or you guys have to think I'm wrong. That's fine, but here's my explanation why I think you're wrong, and
Right.
that's sort of how I approach it. But I mean, do you think these people? I mean, I know you've done all this stuff about Kennicott, some of it for the Dispatch, and the sexual abuse in the church, and your own experiences with it. Um, do you think that these people, when they're in the pews on Sunday, are openly are consciously lying about what they believe, or is there just capacity to fit what they want in life into their skin? Are like very few people think they're being hypocrites when they're hypocrites, and so I
Right.
mean, my point is like when you say they're lying, do you think they were consciously lying, or they were self-deceiving at a really fundamental level?
Yeah, I think they were self-deceiving, and that's a very good point, because I think if you put them under a lie detector test, and when I was talking to them, they would pass, and when I'm
Right.
talking to them now, they would pass. But I think what happens is they were incredibly religiously loyal to something, and the thing that they were loyal to was power,
Mm-hmm.
because I think conservatives have such a persecution sort of mentality and posture, that when they think that someone who's been on TV, regular TV, like The Apprentice, when I loved Celebrity Apprentice, I loved all the apprentices. But it's like somebody's on TV and they're espousing, they're representing me. And that's amazing. And so they're like, okay, well, I hate my liberal neighbors so much that I really, really want to win and wrest power away from them. And so when you have somebody who, it just gives you the most cursory alliance or allegiance to your values, and they're more famous, you're like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, yeah, this is my guy. Yeah, I'm cool like this guy, I guess. But their values shifted when they saw the first opportunity to have power, and it's just like Gollum and Lord of the Rings all over again. And I know this is a tale that's as old as time, and it's not even that interesting, that power corrupts. But I think that people just wanted to be in the room where it happened. And so they just switched their allegiances. And I honestly don't feel like people really realized that they were shifting positions.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's the thing that's so weird to me. Like, I get, like, okay, you don't like the Boy Scout Mitt Romney. You want the pugilist Donald Trump or whatever. Like, I get that sort of, although that's sort of annoying too. But they wanted somebody who fought back. But they fought back on what?
Mm-hmm.
All of these issues shifted, and no one, I feel like I'm being gaslit,
Mm-hmm.
just with the military, for example, just that one example. It was like, don't we support what? Don't we support the military? Like, what do you mean we're mocking this person for, President Bonesper or whatever? It's like, it's just weird. And so no one's ever telling you the truth. No one ever says, I just changed my mind on this issue, and now I support Donald Trump because he now represents what I currently believe. No one ever says that. They're just like, this is our guy. And then they shift with the sand. And then you're like, nobody is speaking the same language. You can't even use the word conservative anymore because it feels like, like there's no definition of that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know how I self-identify. People on podcasts are like, what are you politically? And I was like, I'm just confused
Yeah.
and slightly apathetic, though I know that's probably not what people on this podcast are. They're not, but
Oh, we got lots of apathetic people. I mean, again, like, it's the remnant, right? It's like
right.
uh, and I get a lot of grief from people, um, a lot of grief because I'm a both sideser, right? Because I'm still what we would consider conservative in 2015, right?
Right.
I still believe most of that stuff.
Me too.
I have some tweaks here and
Yeah.
there about stuff where, because when you have to walk around to the other side a little bit more on the partisan stuff to see it from the other side's point of view, you're like, okay, I see how I maybe took that too strongly or whatever, but like I'm
Right.
still a conservative, right? And so that gets me to the thing about the both sidesism thing. Um you've had experiences with, and you write about it in the book, you have experiences with your newfound tribe turning out not to be that reliable a tribe either, right? I mean, you had this where people were nice to you and say, "Okay, these are my friends now," and it turns out, well, that has a shelf life to it too. Why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, we're in a very strange position because I grew up with Ronald Reagan posters on my wall. And I mean, and I was young, like I think I was 5 when he was inaugurated. And I would cut out the newspaper pictures of Ronald Reagan. I just loved him to the point that my dad had to hide the paper from me because he could no longer read it because of the holes. But I was sort of a strange kid in that way. And I feel like I'm the same person. And so frequently, though, it's like once the conservatives got sick of us, you sort of want to run into the open arms of your liberal neighbor who's going to welcome you. But that's not what I found. When I went to Lipscomb and hated it as much as I thought I did, I thought I would and quit. I ended up at NYU. And there I thought enrolled in like women's studies, gender studies classes because I was interested in it. I didn't know what that was. And so I joined that class and I sounded pretty much like I do now with this accent. And I was married and I was super young. And I went to class and they were like, "What? You are married and you're 21?" I think I was 21 at the time. And they were like, "Is your husband oppressing you?" And I was like, "I don't know. He does make me do the dishes." I just sort of I got sort of confused because I wanted this to be my tribe, but I never could acquiesce to all of the various tenets that you have to pass these tests to be included in these groups. And I couldn't change the way I felt on certain issues, including the life issue and and the fact that I was married, they hated that. The fact that I went to church, I called God he, and I didn't understand that people had problems with that. Like I had never traveled. Like I went from Paris, Tennessee to Gramercy Park, basically an NYU gender studies class. And anyway, I would make people cry inadvertently just by admitting, like, "Oh yeah, no, I believe this." And people would run out of the class crying because they were intimidated by my, I don't know, my rhetoric. It was weird because I had no rhetoric. I was just like showing up in New York for the first time. But yeah, so there's never any real place where people really think we're awesome and want us to be a part of the club. Jonah, this is so shocking.
Yeah, but so that's the thing. I mean, it's like obviously, I mean, one of my favorite stories is, and I don't know if you have it in the book or not, but it's David's story about going to Harvard Law School and go into a professor's house for brunch, and they're serving lox, and David's like, "This sushi is amazing," and two of the other law students are like, "David, it's salmon. Don't you know any Jews?" And David's like, "No, do you?" He's at like Professor Bernstein's apartment, and he's talking to the Saul and Moisha and whatever. And so like it's I love the story, but in part it's because like I grew up on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, right?
Yes.
And we were political conservatives completely surrounded by liberals. That's just what it was. And I always make these jokes and speeches about how we were like Christians in ancient Rome. You meet another conservative, you draw a little C in the dirt in Central Park, and you're like, "I'll meet you in the catacombs," that kind of thing. And so it could not have been a more different upbringing than what you had and really what David had, right? I mean, it was like my parents had traveled a lot. They were sort of in the media and all that kind of stuff. And so where was I going? So like, it's funny, like deaf people and gay people, they make their communities when they're adults or with sort of strangers, right? Because they have to join a group, an affiliative group kind of thing in a way that they're not born into. And so the conservatives I always were in, these are people I chose. This was my tribe. I went to National Review, I went to the American Enterprise Institute. But where you grew up, like it was sort of fish don't know they're wet kind of thing. Everybody was pro-military. I mean, you wouldn't like say something anti-military, right? And you wouldn't
Never.
And people misbehaved, to be sure. We are all fallen creatures, but like the cultural emphasis was on being a stand-up Christian person and having good values and all that kind of stuff. And so I don't know, it hit me when I was going through the book. It's just like, I don't know what it would be like for me to feel like my actual tribe, my actual like people I grew up with and was surrounded by, that I all agreed with, because I never lived that. I never had a group. I've always been outnumbered my entire life. Never
Interesting.
never lived anywhere where my vote wasn't canceled out 8-1, 9-1. And so for me, it's just priced into my life. And like for you, it's like, no, these are supposed to be your people. And then, David and you were being brutally, attacked online by people who call themselves real Christians. You're being approached by people in church saying terrible things to you. You're getting FBI, you open the book with the stuff about maybe you're gonna get a pipe bomb coming to your house. And I have no shared cultural experience with like this is the life I chose. But like for you in a certain way, it's like betrayed by your base, but I don't know
Right.
how else to put it.
Right. And it's not just one base, it's like so many at the same time.
Yeah.
Because it was the GOP, it was the church, and the church, put that under the category because they are under Donald Trump's spell, but also, and I'm talking about white evangelicals, but also, their apathy towards sexual abuse. And then geographically, as you point out, living here in Tennessee and these very conservative bastions, you just sort of feel ill at ease because you have to protect yourself from, weird conversations or people who know who you are and they want to tell you how true Tennesseans feel, or you don't know any real Americans, or, and what's part of the reason why I wrote the book is like, you can't out Tennessee me, man. Like I'm familiar with the state of Tennessee. I'm familiar with America and I love it. So, and I love it. I feel patriotic. I love our country. I love capitalism. Like I love all of the things. And so it's like, I don't fit into any, appropriate place in society apparently. But Jonah, one time I had a ghost client who'd been in prison for 20 years, and she was African American, was put into prison, I think, during the Clinton administration and got out 20 years later. And she did not have access to news media. So I got her, she actually stayed at our house when we were doing the book. And she was like, well, what am I politically? And I was like, well, what were you in the 90s? And she described herself. And I said, I'm sorry to tell you, I think you might be a Republican. And she was like, I was a Democrat when I went in. And I was like, I know, but you're not going to believe what has happened. And I feel like that's like if you had that conversation with so many people, like in 1990, if I could sit down with James Dobson and say, James Dobson, are you going to support a rapist? He'd say, oh no. In 98, he'd say, no, definitely. I would never support a rapist. And here we are, it's just weird. I don't get it. I feel like everyone's gaslighting us.
No, I'm with you. Like I was pretty deeply committed in the Clinton impeachment stuff, and I thought what he did was bad.
Yeah.
And everyone I knew in my chosen conservative tribe thought it was bad. And you try to ask them, why did you, if what Bill Clinton did was bad, why do you think Donald Trump didn't do worse? And you just get this weird sort of, I mean, the reason why I don't think it's just gaslighting is because I think they're gaslighting themselves. I mean, like real gaslighting is when you're really screwing with somebody and you know the truth and you're twisting it to screw them. But I just find like a lot of these people, I mean, I'm not a Southerner, but I feel like saying bless your heart to a lot of them because
they deserve it.
Yeah, I think they're just kind of, it's a self-delusion thing. And
it is. And unfortunately, we had the other option was Hillary, who was horrible and made fun of sex abuse victims. So, so you've got Donald Trump, who, credibly accused of rape at the time, and Hillary Clinton, who, should have been a felon and be imprisoned and is mocking Paula Jones. Like I grew up I grew up listening to Rush Limbaugh, and we did not like the Clintons, and that was not fake. That was all for a lot of good reasons.
Yeah.
So anyway, there was just no place to land. And so I think because people didn't feel like they had another option because they didn't believe that they could not vote, or vote for a third party, quixotic candidate or whatever. They just sort of justified and justified and justified. But I know what you're saying, and I think you're actually right. I'm acquiescing to your point of view on this because I believe that people voted for the lesser of two evils, but nobody wants to be on that team of team lesser evil. And so eventually you're like, well, yeah, I voted for the guy. So sure, I believe X, Y, and Z that he's espousing, because it's just not very fun to assume that you voted for evil and to maintain that sort of complexity of thought for the rest of the administration, because you want to support,
Right.
you want to, but you just in this circumstance, you shouldn't.
Particularly in a very polarized culture war kind of context, you have to, if you believe the other side is purely evil, you kind of like think, well, I'm the other side of that coin, so my side actually has to be super, super good. And what happens is, what used to be the yardstick that we would measure politicians by gets shaved down and bent to fit Trump, rather than Trump being held accountable to the standard, right? And I think that that's what's happened. Is like, I mean, the best example, the best illustration of this is always Sean Hannity, because Sean Hannity will take whatever failure Donald Trump has and turn it into a virtue. And, this is what we want in a president. Like, no, it's not what we want, like, and I think that that's the capacity for people's self-delusion is really just sort of is the biggest lesson I've had in the last 10 years, I'd say. But this isn't about me. So there's an issue that is like Trump adjacent, but not Trumpy, in that it's the issue of race, right? And you and David adopted, she's not a little girl anymore, but she's 16 now.
16, yeah.
From Ethiopia. And I've heard David talk about it. I've talked to David about it, but it kind of opened your eyes a bit on the reality of race and racism in sort of daily life. And why don't you sort of talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so we have two biological children who were blonde-haired and blue-eyed, and we adopted our third, and Naomi is beautiful and wonderful. And we lived pretty much the same lives with both, our biological and our adopted kid. But when we would take Naomi out, we just had everything was different, including, but not limited to, like, we lived in the same neighborhood. And I took my older two to the pool 50 million times. And then I started taking Naomi to the pool. And in this neighborhood, she was targeted, not like people were calling her the N-word, but they were constantly asking her if she was there, and can I see your bracelet, and do you belong? And one lifeguard said, did you jump the fence? So those four things happened in rapid succession. It wasn't a coincidence, and she wasn't misbehaving. And then I noticed, like at Nordstrom, that we were being followed by a cop. A cop actually stopped Naomi because they thought she was shoplifting. And no one in my family has been accused of shoplifting before. And you start noticing it. And so I realized that I sort of missed a lot of what my Black neighbors were telling me about the way that they interact with society, because I'd never seen it before. I'd never seen it in my life, and would have sworn that it wasn't true. And then I sort of got, like when you're in a store and you notice that you're being followed by the security guards, you notice that.
Yeah.
And so I sort of had to sort of repent of that mindset and get to know like the issues more and how to talk about it. And maybe there were things I said in the past, like about police brutality, that I needed to change. And so this book is sort of like a mea culpa on some of that.
How'd you cope with dealing with a African-American girl's hair? Because that's the thing that people always, like, I'm always sort of fascinated by, is like, it's just a different issue. Black women and their hair. And I mean this with nothing but respect and like admiration, but it's just it's a cultural thing, right?
Yes, and I did not fully appreciate it. I do now, but I started doing YouTube videos, and I would teach myself how to do her hair. I learned how to box braid. I learned how to do Bantu knots. I learned how to wash it and detangle it. But man, it was like 10 hours of angst when I would do it. But it just took me, I had a huge learning curve. But before I learned, because Naomi was very, like, she didn't have, they shaved their heads in the orphanages. So I had a little bit of time to learn, but I didn't know I was supposed to. And so her hair just started getting a little bigger and a little bigger, but I thought it was super cute. But what I thought was cute, other African American women did not. And so I would constantly have these women come up to me in stores and say, you need to fix her hair. You need to fix her hair. And I, as a white person, would look and I'd say, I think it looks cute. But now I understand what they mean. It really hurt my feelings because on top of all the adoption trauma that you're really struggling to, keep ahead of, I didn't know how to detangle, but I do now. She's cute. She has cute braids.
I just love the image of these African American ladies coming up to Nancy French in the store saying, "Girl, you need to do something about that."
I know. They were so adamant, and it was so common. I know I was doing things wrong, but I didn't at the time, and it hurt my feelings.
I didn't mean to. I mean, of all the dark memories that you explore, with honestly, I didn't think that this was the one that I was going to like really injure you with. But so just staying on this for a second, like I know you go to a predominantly Black church now. Is there something not obvious about the difference between Black church and white church that you were sort of bowled over by? It was like, oh, this is different.
Well, we kept going to our PCA church in Franklin, and people would confront us even at the communion table about Donald Trump, which was just, I couldn't do it. I remember the last time I went, I was confronted by 3 people, and I walked out and I said, I'm never going back to church again. But we found this church, and the thing that was really beautiful about it, it's not that it's theologically perfect or there's no perfect church, but it's not going to be full of like neo-Confederates. That's what happened at my PCA church. People who were neo-Confederates would confront us, which was just weird. But the thing about the African American church that was so touching and it made us decide to go there is when we visited, they make you raise your hand if you're a visitor so they can give you like coffee mugs. And we raised our hand, and they came out and they gave David and me these little bags, but they didn't give one to Naomi. And she looked at Naomi and she goes, you belong here, don't you? And she just walked off like she thought she was a member. And I thought, oh, we're feeling like outsiders. And Naomi has felt that her whole life. And so we wanted to go somewhere where we felt like we were, in the minority and she could feel like she's in the majority. And we've since put her in a school in Nashville where she's surrounded by more diversity. We just, where we live in Franklin, Tennessee is just white. And there's no way to combat that, and you can't really hold like a church accountable for like representing it where it's geography, so like the churches are generally segregated. So our church is like 85 African American and 15, I think, white. But anyway, it's just really nice. They have so many. So of course it's more lively. It's more exciting. There's a lot more emotion, but also there's so much different teaching, Jonah. They'll say things. I've been to church my whole life, but they'll say things that I've never heard before in my life that relate to race. The pastor is brilliant. And he'll go through the scriptures and he says, I only talk about race when the Bible talks about race, but you don't realize how much the Bible talks about race. And so he dives into things and he'll say things that I've never heard before. And the entire congregation takes it as fact. And they know about it. I've never even heard of it. So like, for example, the curse of Nimrod. Have you ever heard of this?
Heard of Nimrod?
Yes. But, well, yeah. So Nimrod was a mighty warrior who later founded Babel, and there's nothing in him in the scriptures that's negative about this African American businessman. But they call it
African American businessman.
Yeah, like he not only did he settle Babel, so he was like a civic planner. He was a warrior, and he'd done business. He's mentioned in the scriptures more than the Tower of Babel story.
Okay, but just to be clear, because I'm a little confused. African American businessman in the Bible.
Yeah, so he was from Africa. I think he was just...
sorry. So when you're saying African American...
I said African American.
And I'm like...
He came to Detroit. Come on. No, sorry.
I get you now. Okay.
Yeah, he was African. So he was an African businessman. And there's nothing in the Bible that was negative about him at all. But at some point in pop cultural society, and it might have been Bugs Bunny who did this, I'm not kidding, because they started using Nimrod as an insult to insinuate stupidity.
Right.
Because they blamed Nimrod for what happened at Babel. And so everyone in my congregation was like, yeah, Nimrod, he he really was done dirty by the people. And so they would talk about Nimrod's terrible treatment, and the whole congregation was like, yeah, yeah. And I was like,
Mhm.
okay, I need to look up this, because this doesn't make sense. But then I would learn about that, and then they would say something else, and I would learn about that. So I'm just constantly learning about, the way that they perceive the Bible and the culture and stuff. But anyway, it's just very
That's interesting.
enlightening.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
no, that's
interesting.
is the food better, worse at the
Oh
potluck
man.
kind of stuff?
Yeah, they're the best. They make the best food. That's the real reason to join.
Um, so everyone at I don't know how much David conveys to you because he's so sloppy and disorganized and
Sure.
inconsiderate, but
Yes.
um, we were all devastated when we found out about your cancer, and we try. It's one of those things where on the one, I'm sure you've had more of these experiences than I have, where you want to ask people about it,
Yeah.
but you also don't want to bring up things that it's like it, you don't know if you never want to bring someone down, right? So like you don't want to ask David about it if it brings him down, but you want to ask David about it to show concern and
Sure.
to find out what's going on, kind of thing. And so
Yeah.
how is it going? Just sort of generically, I'm very in as non-condescending a way as possible. I'm kind of proud of you about how you sort of owned it and went full on Twitter and elsewhere about what you're going through and not trying to hide anything. But how's it going?
So thank you so much. Yeah, I was diagnosed at the end of last year. I had 6 months of chemo. I'm still in it. I'm in month 5 though.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel very thankful because I was diagnosed with triple negative breast cancer, very aggressive kind, already spread to the lymph nodes. Had about a 2-week period where I thought I was a goner because they said it could have spread to other parts of the body. And so for some reason, even though cancer is ubiquitous, for some reason, I've always tuned out. I don't want to know about it. I don't think
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting. I don't want to hear about it. So wasn't familiar with what it would look like. So I'm undergoing the most brutal form of chemo right now that exists. And for some reason, I thought that would mean that I would be face planted in a mattress for 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm able to do stuff, I'm playing pickleball every day. And I was very thankful that I came out sort of as a cancer patient because, but I don't think I would have. David inadvertently outed me. I don't know if you know the story, but he
I
was on
don't.
it. Yeah, he was on one of those Zoom conferences where you have like 3 experts and like a room full of people. And the organizer of the event accidentally turned the mic live before the event started. So David pops in and he's like, "Oh, so sorry, Nancy had to have surgery because of her cancer report," or something like that. And everyone heard it. And so this was way in the beginning. And so everyone starts typing, "Nancy French has cancer. What did he say about a cancer report? She had surgery." And so they were trying to delete the comments, the
Mm-hmm.
organizer was, because they realized what they'd done. So it wasn't David's fault or the organizer's fault, but I just decided because everyone started contacting me. I was like, okay, because I thought I could, because I have a wig, I think I can pretty much pass, other than the fact that I'm pretty mentally foggy. But I wouldn't have come out. But
Mm-hmm.
because of this, I decided to just to do it and to shave my head and to show that, because I didn't want to try to make this seem more positive than it was. I just wanted to sort of be real. It's hard to know the right amount of stuff to include, but when I did my bald picture, my very first one, I got so many messages from people who said that they went through their entire cancer journey and did not tell their husbands,
Hmm.
or their sons did not know what their head looked like, or their adult children do not know that they have cancer now, because I think people just are filled with shame with these health issues, maybe,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe for other reasons that are completely legitimate. So I feel like part of my shtick here now is to sort of destigmatize the baldness or the discomfort or what bodies look like or whatever. So
Mm-hmm.
when I promote the book, I'm wearing the wig because the book doesn't have to do with cancer and I don't want to give the wrong impression. But I also try to, be as honest and candid as I can about the cancer thing, because I think it's important for men and women to realize that you can just not look that great and you're still super valuable, or you can't be that productive, but you're still valuable, or you can't be charming or think clearly, but you're still valuable.
Have you heard from, I mean, I feel weird because we're at an hour now, and the thing that I don't think we've conveyed, and I don't think I've done a good job conveying, is that, you know, I get a lot of grief. I know David gets a lot of grief. There's this accusation of sort of, you're martyrs, you're making yourself a martyr, you're self-pitying, you're just resentful that the conservative movement doesn't care about you anymore. I get all this kind of crap all the time, including from like some prominent media figures who I think have sold out, and I think that they are, when I DM them about a certain, I don't think you should have said that the way you said it. There's one prominent one I got into a while ago. This person completely wheeled on me and was like, "You're just bitter because you're not relevant anymore, and I am," and all this kind of weird stuff, right? And I think that the thing that what I haven't really conveyed is like, the amount of abuse and ostracism hasn't just been like mean tweets, although there were a lot of mean tweets, right? You got at it a little bit in when you're talking about people confronting David at church, which I just find so profoundly rude, right?
Right.
And the one thing I always thought the Southerners had going for them was politeness. And
Right.
so, but going back to 2015, David got more grief than I did, but I got a lot of grief. And so when I say he got more than I did, that's saying something. And one of the things, I think, getting back to our conversation earlier about how people change, they can't tolerate the idea that they're rooting for a bad guy kind of thing. They can't tolerate the idea that the people who didn't go along with them aren't traitors or heretics, right? And because politics has become so all-consuming, it becomes personal very, very quickly for a lot of people.
Right.
And so, one, I just want to get that out there because, like, you guys have put up with a lot of crap, there's a big difference between, I got all of those Photoshop memes of me in a gas chamber with Donald Trump in an SS uniform pressing the button to kill me.
Oh, I
didn't like that. But
I didn't know that.
I got a lot of them. But like, I saw all the ones with your, at the time, 10-year-old daughter in the chamber. Completely different. Like this is the life I chose. People screwing with your kid, it can make you enrage, right? And so and so I just want to get that out there. But like, has anybody who you thought you lost because of politics wheeled around just to show some support and some sympathy when they found out about the cancer diagnosis?
Oh, yeah. Everybody's been so great about the cancer diagnosis. Now, I know, Jonah, I can't believe that they did that to you. I mean, I can, but that's so infuriating. But, I've complained a ton about Twitter being a cesspool. But when I came out with this cancer diagnosis, I have been enveloped in love. I mean, to tell you, it is like a different, like, I think some people are on Twitter and it's fine. Because when this came out, I mean, like I still get people, like some people make fun of me because I'm bald, like some of the MAGA right or whatever. But people have been so kind. I have been, people have reached out to me that you never would suspect. And including, this is just a strange bit of trivia. I was complaining about my wig. I went to a party thinking I looked cute, and someone accidentally ripped off my wig, and I was standing there bald, and I was crying like a 12-year-old being ostracized at the lunchroom. And I was talking about that on Twitter, and Morgan Fairchild called me.
Wow.
And she had wig tips. She was like, "Okay, I know we can do a Zoom. I can teach." She taught me what kind of wig to buy, how to wash it, sent me links on the right kind of combs. I mean, like, this is crazy. Like, she reached out on Twitter and asked for my phone number, and she goes, "Call me if you need advice," which I would never do. Then she called me. And so, I mean, it's just like, but I have people who are Trump supporters who are so kind to me, and people who are liberals who are so kind to me. And so the cancer community is awesome. The political community is treacherous, but this is kind of nice.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I want to be clear. That doesn't surprise me. It turns out a lot of people are much more decent than you get the impression from our national discourse and from Twitter and all that kind of stuff. But are there people who you sort of turn their back on you who are like, okay, well, this is different. You know, she's pro-Trump or she's anti-Trump, blah, 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 blah. But like, this is bigger than that. Has there been any of that kind of outreach?
I want to say yes, because I want that to be true.
Yeah.
But that narrative, I don't think that there's been one person, even after Trump was, held liable in court for the rape, no one came back and said, I was wrong on that, or I understand your point. The closest to it is I've had some conversations like with a family member where I was just weeping, like, you don't understand this guy, but I'm not, and they sort of understand, I think. But no, has anybody done that to you? Has anyone come and said, okay, you were right, or okay, I was wrong? Like one person?
No. And again, I wasn't even asking for that. I was just asking for people who ostracized you for politics, thinking maybe they would come back and say something nice because of the humanity of you having cancer and stuff like that. But like, no, I remember pretty early on when Chris Starwalt was still at Fox. I was talking to him about, I wrote this piece in like March of 2016 about how the right was like an invasion of body snatchers, where people would go to bed one night completely agreeing with you about Trump, and then the next morning their doppelganger would wake up and be like, under Comrade Trump, we will have the greatest wheat harvest we've ever seen. It's like, what the hell happened? Like the pod people, that kind of thing. And I remember talking to him about that stuff probably well before then. And I remember him saying to me, look, you're never going to get the you were right thing. You're never going to get people saying, gosh, we should have listened to you. The ones who are going to come out well about this are the ones who navigate and pick their battles and don't take a side and vacillate and all that kind of stuff. And he meant people like Eric Bolling and that kind of thing. And he was right. And you would think, given the commitments that you guys and the connections you guys have with like the pro-life community, you would think just in the last week with Trump coming out with his sort of abortion pivot, people would say, oh, looks like, David and Nancy were right about that. But like, we're never going to get that. And it's frustrating. Some historian might say it, but
right.
I just don't think anyone is ever going to admit, not in any, some individual might, but like, it's not going to be a trend where, the hot new craze is people admitting they were wrong. I don't see it happening,
Yeah, but no, the Trump loving people down here, which is, most of the people that I know, they've been so great about the cancer. They're the people, they bring meals. They're great. So, and I've sort of, because of the cancer, I've sort of had to check out mentally from like the shenanigans of what's going on. Thankfully, because David sometimes reads me his New York Times articles before he publishes them, I stay abreast of most topics. But I just don't care anymore. I don't care what people think politically. I just care about the people. And I still care about America, and I think democracy is important and all that. But like, I just don't have the bandwidth to care about anyone's particular, position on immigration or, the marginal tax rate or something. I just decided that I can't care about it and just accept the love where people are willing to give it.
Yeah. That's like, it's a healthier way to live life, right? It's just like, take people as you find them and don't let politics define, politics is not the window on your soul, but too many people think it is. So do you think you're going to go back to ghosting, or are you your own person now again for the foreseeable future?
I think I might be my own person now. I don't know. I sort of canceled all of my not appearances, but my book deals, and quit all my jobs, all my gigs. And I'm sort of just doing things for myself. And I might be opening up a new investigation because I really enjoyed that, Jonah. When I became an investigative journalist,
Yeah.
I just enjoyed sort of the chase of that and trying to find justice and truth. And it feels so. I'm gonna maybe start one of those in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I apologize to folks. We didn't get too deep in the weeds on the Kanakuk stuff, but thanks to your reporting, this. Well, why don't you just sort of explain it? So, like, I don't have to like paraphrase
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. So there was a camp in Branson, Missouri called Kanakuk Camps, and Gretchen Carlson alerted me to the fact that they were using NDAs against children, and there were possibly, several people who were gagged by NDAs after having been abused by this people at the camp. There was one super predator who abused hundreds, but I have reports of 51 predators at the camp, and I've tracked down some of them. Several are in prison. But Gretchen was right in her suspicions, but she was way low. So like I started investigating, and I found out just terrible things. And so I thought that if I was able to prove a fraction of what these survivors were telling me, that the evangelical church would be rocked. And
Mm-hmm.
so I went to all of these places, the New York Times, the Washington Post, even Christianity Today. And I was like, y'all need to investigate this. But nobody would, because it was really complex. They would
Mm-hmm.
need like a spotlight crew, to work like a year with a team of like 5 people. But no one would do it. And because I am an older person, knowing that younger people are unsafe, I felt like I had to do something. But as I mentioned, I'm a college dropout. I don't know how to do journalism. And so, absent any other options, I just looked online and I Googled, what does off the record mean?
Mm-hmm.
And there's like a lot of layers of that. I had no idea.
There's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I sort of taught myself how to become an investigative journalist. And then I investigated for like 2 years. And then I didn't have anywhere to publish until David had the idea of coming to you guys, and y'all so graciously connected me, obviously, with Steve Hayes, who went, I
Mm-hmm.
think, to Columbia
Mm-hmm.
journalism school. He's like fancy pants. And
Yeah.
so I presented my work to Steve, and he helped me, because there were some things I didn't know, and he sort of taught that to me. So that was really great. But the big thing that y'all did was you published the articles. And I'm so thankful for that, because when we published them, like for the first time, parents would have a Google footprint. So like if they Googled Kanakuk, they would know that it was unsafe for the first time
Mm-hmm.
in 100 years. So, 100 years ago when they were Googling Kanakuk, the results were just very substandard.
Very limited results 100 years ago on Google. Very
Yes,
limited.
but because of you, we fixed that. No, but I will be forever grateful for what you guys did, because not only did you publish it, I know, because I'm not a professional journalist before this. I know that probably Steve Hayes had to do a lot of heavy lifting trying to make sure that I, dotted all my I's. But that changed everything for me, because I was able to. I bet we published 4 articles through you guys, and the truth is out there. The church sort of had a collective yawn about the abuse that happened there, but lawsuits have been filed because of my reporting. Some of the people, one of the lawyers who's representing the victims also represented Jeffrey Epstein's victims.
Mm-hmm.
So they've got a lot of high-powered people fighting for them now, and that's all because you guys gave us a platform. So I'm very thankful.
Well, I mean, you did all the heavy lift. I mean, I talked to David. I mean, I talked to Steve pretty heavily during that whole period, and just the for us, it was just like, we're a startup. Let's just make sure we don't get sued, right?
Right.
And other than that, let's do whatever we can to get this stuff out there. I didn't say that if they sued us, it was. I want to be clear. It's not because you did anything inaccurate. It's just like, you can still get sued and be completely innocent, and just the cost of defending yourself, that was,
Yeah.
So that was the. I mean, it's weird how people like your husband and his ilk, the lawyers, sort of backhandedly enforce a lot of journalistic ethics for fear of getting into those kinds of litigious problems. All right, so I don't want to end on a cancer and sexual abuse kind of theme, because that's kind of pretty downer.
Right.
So let's do something that will cheer the hearts of everybody.
Okay.
What are some really profoundly embarrassing things you can tell me about David French?
Jonah, you witnessed one of them. Jonah, I am surprised that it has taken you this long to bring this up, but one time we were in the Adirondacks, and Steve Hayes was there too, and we were boating to this very beautiful place to have, I think, breakfast. And David and I chose a canoe, and we were canoeing, and my arms were getting tired, and it was hot. And there was a guy with a boat, and he offered to tow us. And David said, no, 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 we don't need a tow. And I said, tow me. I want to be towed. This is ridiculous. So we got towed. And so suddenly we were just going fast, being towed behind an actual boat. And we zipped past you guys and the Hayes lickety split. And your eyes were as wide as saucers, where y'all were making fun of David Prince for getting towed.
Well, I don't want to be clear about this. You know, this is a very delicate subject, and David, I still mock David about this often. I will text him pictures of him being towed every now and then. I don't give a rat's ass about someone wanting to be towed. That is fine.
Right.
But the thing that I think that people don't know about the Frenches is, like, you know, I say this all the time behind your back, and I will say it to your face. You're among the most decent Christian people, in the best sense of it, you know, possible. Most Christian people I know, right? And there's wonderful, sweet people. But you guys talk an unbelievable amount of smack about sports, competition. I mean, it's just like, who are these people that talk this way? And like, I know like semi-mobbed up Italians who don't talk smack the way you guys do. And David had literally said, like, we're going to have a canoe competition. We're going to have a canoe race tomorrow. And the Frenches are going to destroy all, because, you know, and it just went on and on. I was like, I didn't even know we were like, and then you guys get towed on the way back. And I was just like, so that's like, again, if we just, we're going to have a fun day on the lake and we're going to canoe and whatever. And then you just decided to go back because you were tired. I never would have given you a hard time about it, but it was the smack talk that I cannot let pass. So anyway.
Well, see, no, I have a whole philosophy on trash talking, and here it is. If you trash talk and you win, then you had fun trash talking. If you trash talk and you lose or fail, then at least you had fun trash talking. So it's a win-win. You're just going to win.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not a big theological finger wagger at people, but how much trash talking did Jesus do? I mean, I just out of curiosity.
He trash talked death. Yeah. So
okay, all right. You know, do I look like death? I mean, it just.
Well.
Anyway, Nancy French, thank you so much for doing this. The book again is Ghosted: An American Story, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. This was so much fun.